This is one of the manuscripts we saved. It's on kalam and logic. Like, if you want, just be circulate, but just be very, very careful in looking at it if you're interested. I've been trying to track if there is another copy of this, and I have not found in any of the sources another recorded copy of this manuscript. So it seems like a singular copy. It's not in Siski, and it's not in Brockham, and it's not in the indexes of the main libraries of manuscripts. So, but it's clearly valuable because its arguments on the relationship between logic and theology is very advanced. It's clearly an engagement with Aristotelian logic, and as typical of these types of manuscripts, it talks about al-Mu'allim al-Kabir, and Mu'allim al-Kabir is Aristotle. And so we were just saying earlier that the dream is that the Usuli Institute would have the resources to create postgraduate fellowships so that people would come and I train them in reading manuscripts, and they would edit something like this and publish it. And, be able to dedicate your time to train someone to work with a manuscript like that, because 99.9% of Arabic speakers cannot read something like this.
Is this slide? The author?
You wouldn't have heard of him. It's called al-Hindi. He was actually from the Indian subcontinent. Clearly a Hanafi madhab, but he's writing on philosophy and logic, so he's not. The madhab doesn't make a difference. Anyway, let's start.
It's now almost 7:10, so maybe we can do like a half hour the most.
Okay, make sure you tell me when the time is up, and
so let's how many people have questions actually? Okay, so usually what we do, just to kind of be a little bit more efficient with time, is have everyone just state their question, and then the professor can tackle them all at once. So go ahead, Salma, let me start.
I was wondering what's the difference between takfir and istighfar?
Okay.
Maybe this is like a big question, but we're talking about tasbih, but I just wanted to know the origins of Salat al-Tasbih.
Yeah, it's related to the surah we just went over at the end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes with reminding people that he's a tawwab, so it's the significance of him using that name for the theme that you mentioned of that surah.
I had a couple. So you mentioned briefly that the Quran does not comport with logic, it comports with communitarian values. So just wanted to clarify what that means. And then also relating back to Grace's introduction and relating to our discussion about tasbih, is it something that we should engage in even if we don't feel the highest level of intention? And just engage in a practice and form the habit?
Is that it?
I just have a few questions, if possible. When you talked about how the Meccan surahs were used to develop individuals, and that for Allah could talk to the Prophet and the community in Medina about they had to build themselves in Mecca, and I think you were stating that if we use the current system of Islam today, and that was the Islam that the Prophet Muhammad taught to the Sahaba, then there wouldn't be any Muslims living at that time because no one would believe. I just want to expand on that thought if possible. Also, is it possible to explain the individual versus communal, individualistic versus communal aspects of Islam? Like, what is individually Islam asks and what is on the community, and then just a fun one, I guess. Is there any hope for like something of a union of Muslim countries similar to the EU to happen in the near future, and what are the reasons what are the things that we can do in order to achieve that? Thank you.
God, the questions are just, covers the entire universe.
It's without my question.
You want to ask your questions too?
Without my question, no, it's okay. Another time.
Well, I mean, I don't know. It is impossible to deal with these questions in half an hour, so I'll just pick and choose. So, the first thing is, because I think you misheard me about the Quran and logic and communal values. What I was saying is that when this was in the context of talking about aging and reflecting upon your experiences in life. And I was saying that as an individual observation, I have found that the way that people act, it comports with communal values, that people are really social animals and a product of this social construction of meaning rather than comporting their behavior to any sense of philosophical logic. The Quran itself, the relationship of the Quran to logic and communal values that's a much more complex question, and it's remarkably complex, because when the Quran, for instance, uses expressions like ma'ruf or munkar, by definition, the ma'ruf is something that is good orphan, that is something that has mustahsan orphan, meaning that something that is perceived to be good because of social experiences. And a munkar is something that is reprehensible and reproachable, again, by communal experiences. And so there is a considerable amount of discussion in the Islamic tradition, and then whether it takes place in what community. So whether you're talking about the discussion in Usuli al-Fiqh and jurisprudence, or the discussion in philosophy, or the discussion in kalam and speculative theology, or the discussion in Sufism as to what extent communal standards can actually establish what is wrong or not wrong, and to what extent the Quran incorporates communal standards. So that's a very big topic that I don't even dare get into. And of course, I mean, just as a small the small example, the story that was the story of Hayy bin Yaqzan, that was written by Ibn Tufail, upon which the whole Robinson, was it Robinson Crusoe?
Yeah.
Yeah, Robinson Crusoe was based upon. The whole narrative of Hayy bin Yaqzan, and it was extremely influential in the development of European thought. There's actually a very good book written in English that was published by Brill some time ago. It's out of print, but you can still find it in libraries, on the impact of the story of Hayy bin Yaqzan on the development of the European European Renaissance and later ideas, and especially the impact of people like Locke, the translation of that story in people like Locke. The reason I mentioned Hayb al-Niqzan, because the whole story of Hayb al-Niqzan dealt with, sort of, it was an attempt to explore this notion of to what extent bad and good depends on social standards and the extent to which it's ontological or deontological and so on and so forth. So, and the entire narratives of Ibn Rushd and the whether the Neoplatonic philosophers and the Islamic tradition. So it's a very big. I mean, it's one of these things that you open up and you have to catch your breath for how huge the whole notion of the relationship between social values and logic or philosophy and the place of law in ascertaining what's good, what's bad, what's not, so on. And for short, you can just read Reasoning with God, because Reasoning with God wrestles with this whole relationship between revelation, reason, and social norms. And Reasoning with God focuses, it's a big book, as you know, and so it took me about 600 pages to end up saying something that I think is half coherent about the same issue. And it is truly a challenging intellectual issue, because and I don't have a way of summarizing the arguments of Reasoning with God, so it took me about 600 pages of small print to end up saying something about it. It took me 10 years writing that book. I was writing it for 10 years and constantly wrestling with different issues. But I don't believe that you need to fetter through these intellectual issues to have a relationship with the Quran, because the relationship with the Quran is direct and powerful and impactful, and the impact of language upon our psychology, and even take it a step further, and I will even say the impact of language upon our spiritual well-being and our energy and our aura is just direct and undeniable. I mean, if one wants to be, I don't know, fancy about it, you could read with interest, and I'm sure already seen the stuff about what was his name, that Japanese guy that was taking pictures of water, molecules of water, and the impact of music and words, and he would have swear words and then take a picture of their effect on molecules of water. You've never heard about that? It's really fascinating.
Masaru Emoto.
Yeah.
Emoto. Yeah, it's very interesting, because he would have bad language and see its impact on molecules of water, and then have nice language and see its impact on molecules of water. But then there's also these experiments that were made on the impact of prayer on molecules of water, and seeing the way that at the molecular level things interact with. And when you read this material, if you've read enough of the Sufi material in Islam, none of it is surprising, because it is. And what's remarkable is before even somehow the Muslim intellect, even in the way Muslims designed their architecture, reproduced this basic molecular structure that you find in at the micro level, in the core of the definition of beauty, the symmetry. And you see it in Muslim architecture. It's quite remarkable how the relationship of Muslims to nature in the first few centuries, reached the level of intimacy that they were able to innately reproduce this material, and it became the definition and earmark of Muslim architecture and Muslim design for centuries, until corrupted by Western influences and so on. I mean, there's some really fascinating studies done on Muslim calligraphy and Muslim architecture and the basic molecular structure of the universe, and the mathematical relationship between reproducing Muslim calligraphy and architecture. And the interesting thing is that these studies were not written by Muslims. Actually, the most famous study about the Muslim architecture and calligraphy and the molecular design of the universe was written by an Israeli scholar. And he sort of, he keeps, it's like he can't believe himself. His whole study has this, like, these cheeky remarks about, like, I can't believe how these people figured this stuff out. He even has a footnote where he says, you know, I would have expected to find this mathematical relationship in Talmudic tradition, but you know, somehow I found it in blah blah blah. I mean, you know, you'll find stuff like that in this field, unfortunately. So no, my comment was more about the fact people are in fact far less ingenious and far more disingenuous than they pretend to be. That if life has taught me anything, I mean, I'll give you a very concrete example. When I first came to the U.S. and I was a political science major, I was studying democratic theory with a very famous philosopher called Robert Dahl. Robert Dahl was considered in the 80s sort of like the premier theorist of democracy. And at the time, I would, when I was this young kid coming from Egypt and Kuwait, didn't know anything, and I started saying, referring to the West. And all I was just pounced on. Oh, that's such stupidity. How can you talk about the West? What is the West? You know, you have to liberate your backward thinking from these categories. What do you mean the West? And can you point to where the West is on the map and stuff like that? Including, incidentally, one of the people who jumped on me was Samuel Huntington, because he was a professor at Harvard and he was visiting, and back then he had written a book about the emergence of democratic movements, and I had written a paper where I talked about the relationship of the West to Israel, and he just tore the paper apart. And when I went and met with him during his class hours, he said, nonsense. West doesn't. What do you mean that the West has an emblematic relationship with Israel, a cultural affinity that grows out of the West's sense of guilt about the Holocaust? I mean, that's absolute garbage, blah, blah, blah. Now, lo and behold, of course, the years pass, and suddenly I lived during an era where the same thing that I was jumped on, became everywhere. And when in fact, I remember with this Huntington fellow and Robert Dahl, when I said, well, I am not saying that a Judeo-Christian entity, in fact, is a historical reality. I'm saying that it is an imagined construct in the imagination of historians like Arnold Toynbee. They said that's complete garbage. Arnold Toynbee did not imagine a Judeo-Christian anything. And, you know, lo and behold, and what you learn from that is that people are just thoroughly a product of the way power interacts with social construction of meaning. And power exercises a huge influence on the way they shape meaning. And I'm not denying the importance of critical thought. I would never deny that, and analytical thought. But a healthy skepticism is absolutely necessary so that you're always able to scrutinize claims that rest on an elaborate structure of logic. I mean, whether you do it through the aid of a lot of Foucault or a post-Foucault orientation. I consider myself post-Foucault. I'm no longer impressed by Foucault and Derrida. I mean, I had my phase of Foucault, but I outgrew Foucault and outgrew Derrida as they themselves as inadequate critiques of critique. So that's why I can never stick to. So now that I said all of this, I forgot what the other questions were. I mean, of course, I'll pick the thing that that needles me the most, and then I forget all the equally valid.
Well, let's go around again. So Salma.
But that was the answer
Why
for
don't we
which question?
do two questions at a time, or three,
Okay.
instead of doing.
I mean,
500.
we don't have to get them all tonight. Inshallah. I mean, you waited 6 years to have.
I know.
So
You make your
Rahman-
son wait 6 years. Everyone else just gets their answer like your Google.
So then had also a
On
difference between.
Salat al-Tasabih, just what its origins are, because I know
Yeah.
where it's practiced by certain groups here, but it's contentious with other groups of Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, the whole debate about whether it's bid'ah or not bid'ah, and is it is it anchored in a prophetic practice? There's no evidence that is, but there are okay. One thing we often forget that after the canonization of Bukhari and Muslim and the five so-called Sahih, right? By the time that this process of canonization took place and spread, there had already been established cultural practices that were sometimes preserved in sources like Musnad Ahmad or in some of the Zawaid on this Sahih or that Sahih, and sometimes canonized and sometimes not even canonized. And when you work with manuscripts, you actually, I was taught by Azhari Shuyukh that there is no basis for the Salat Taraweeh, the 30 rak'ahs that is practiced in the India and Pakistan and among Muslims. And then I was working on a hadith manuscript and I don't remember if it was, but it was a Za'idah on Ibn Hibban. And I was surprised that in that manuscript, there were all these traditions I have never seen before about how reportedly it's Sahaba who traveled to India, according to that's what the source said, pray Taraweeh 32 rak'ahs, and so on and so forth. So my point is that we often, when we are modern Muslims, talk about what's a bid'ah and not bid'ah, relying on, quite often, on printed, canonized texts. And, you know, whether printed, meaning in the early 1900s, or printed later. I suspect that Salat al-Tasabih, if someone researched systematically, that will find in the manuscript tradition that it was canonized somewhere. That's what I suspect. Now, that doesn't mean it's not a bid'ah, in the sense that it was not performed by the Prophet ﷺ. I don't believe that he did perform Salat al-Tasabih. But it raises a larger question, and that is throughout, before the Salafi era, throughout the Muslim world, there had developed various sha'air that originated quite often with the way that Islam spread in a particular region or another. And so for, you know, to take a more even prominent, pronounced example, like the sha'air surrounding Mawlid al-Nabi in a place like Egypt, in the Ariyaf of Egypt, right? And the question is, what do we do about these sha'air? Is it that they must be anchored in authentic hadith for us to recognize their validity, or can they perform a role in social piety? Because what I have observed is that I used to be especially in my younger, more intolerant years, I used to, you know, if it doesn't have a basis when it comes to ibadat, in particular, if it doesn't have a basis in Quran and Sunnah defined as an authentic hadith in an authentic source, then there's no place to it. But what I started to observe, what I observed through this process is what is the word I'm looking for? The demolition of cultural practices, and as a result of that is a deconstruction of cultural and social piety throughout the Muslim world. And so people don't celebrate Mawlid al-Nabi, the people who don't celebrate Mawlid al-Nabi anymore, they sit and watch musalsalat. No, I'd rather they go celebrate Mawlid al-Nabi than watch musalsalat. And same with Salat al-Tasabih. I mean, so what? If it has become a culturally rooted pietistic practice that brings the community closer to Allah. I mean, this, of course, you know, it does raise a much, and especially in places like Indonesia and Malaysia and non-cosmopolitan areas and still in the Arab world and so on. Islam was established with centuries of practice in all around the Muslim world, and it created institutions through which societies developed a relationship with their religion. And the puritanical project of demanding that pietistic forms of practice comport to the mechanics of law, and especially law the way modern Muslims understand it, has proved quite problematic. If you talked to me 20 years earlier, I would have not sounded like that. But now I really do think it's one of the things for a very concrete example. You know, when we were in Egypt growing up, we used to go to Masjid al-Hussein. You would remember this. as families. You know, we would go the entire family. You know, the mothers, the aunts, the sisters would all go in Masjid al-Hussein and would all sit together, and sometimes would even eat in Hussein. And the kids would play, and then, you know, prayer comes, and it was very common for the men and women to be sitting, and it was just normal. With the degradation of culture that has taken place throughout the Arab world, now, Masjid al-Hussein, you can't sit as a family together. Men have a section, women have a section, and the sanitization of the space of the mosque, so you can't sit and eat, they don't allow you to do that. And a whole set of social practices that used to be centered around you know, places like Badawi, Shlay Badawi, and mosques like Hussein or Sayyida Zainab or so on. All these cultures were deconstructed on the same paradigm, same sort of literalist, mechanical, legalistic paradigm that denies the value of culture unless it has been canonized in law. And that has, so, you know, as a result, a lot of children don't even, you know, because they can't be with their mothers because the space in Hussein for women is quite small. So women stop taking their children, so that culture where you grew up, where something like the culture of Masjid al-Hussein or Sayyida Zainab or so on was an integral part of the way you define your family and your family relations, has vanished because that space has no longer become hospitable to families. And so, you know, of course, I went on a tangent, but it's a tangent that was sparked by the whole Salat al-Tasabih thing. I think it's an important tangent. Anytime we deconstruct anything, and I wish legalists, especially those who talk in legalese, but they're not trained as real jurists, because the more you're trained as a jurist, the more you can see nuance in law. But the more you are superficially trained, the more you cannot see the nuance in law. And you read law in very mechanical ways. And to create the Muslim mind, the way it has responded to a sense of westernization and alienation, is to all engage in the pretense of legalese. And because they're not properly trained as nuanced jurists, when law clashes with culture, law strips and impoverishes culture. It turns culture into a despotic mechanism. It reduces the complex negotiative dynamics of culture and society to a very mechanical, rigid dynamics of legal thinking. And again, it takes the most brilliant legal minds are the ones that break away from that. But the average legal mind thinks in very structural terms and strips culture of its richness. I also encountered this when I was in Indonesia. I was visiting somewhere and they wanted to honor me, so they brought in this amazing Sufi group of women singers that did these amazing Sufi performances. And it was just so gorgeous. And the women who recited Quran they brought tears to my eye. I mean, and when you talk to them, they have inherited this practice from 10 generations back. And then 10 years after that, I get this letter from the sheikha who headed this tariqah, and she's telling me, oh, help, we are coming under an onslaught by this institution that's been funded by Saudi, that they're saying it's haram that we are doing these performances, and we need your help because they want to shut us down, and so on and so forth. It just rips at your heart, because the beauty that I've heard from that, it's, my response to her, I went to her and said, why didn't I hear a recording of your unbelievable recitation in Egypt? And that was my reaction, because she just brought tears to my eye. Yeah.
So you think it's political? It was political?
Well, so the outbreak of Salafi Wahhabi type, but I think it's I mean, our response to modernity you've got a serious threat during the colonial era, and how do you respond to it? If you basically invest in responding to modernity through investing in engineers and chemists and medical doctors instead of institutions that investigate epistemology, then the nuance. Another. I'll give you this example because it actually. Do you know that among the most underfunded things, and these have become progressively more and more underfunded, there used to be awqaf in Egypt and Sham to fund the institutes of musical learning. There used to be Islamic awqaf, so that if you played the oud, or you played the drum, or you played the flute, your flute or the oud was bought for you by a waqf, and the waqf would continue to fund the musical group or the musician through their learning. Wazarat al-Awqaf in Egypt in 1964 decided, of course they had taken all the awqaf, including the awqaf, decided that the awqaf that was dedicated for music were no longer valid. And the mufti at the time, Samahahullah, issued a fatwa that although these awqaf were created centuries ago, and the deed of the waqf said, I want to support the tawashih, I want to support this and that. Wazat al-Awqaf made it no more. Music is now a secular activity to be supported by Wazat al-Ta'lim. Now, of course, so what happened? All the Islamic music, quote unquote, went down the drain. There's no funding. And leave alone that Wazat al-Ta'lim itself stopped investing in anything musical. Every decade it became less and less. Today, and this is through UNESCO grants and European grants, Dar al-Opera Masriya, the opera, because the Egyptians allowed the performance of opera Aida by Verdi at the Pyramid Plateau, right? So they got money for Dar al-Opera Masriya from Europe. So most recently, now they have some money from Europe, so they were able to maintain 600 musicians so of course, who now is appointed as the head of Dar al-Opera Masriya? A Liwa, a general from the Egyptian army. Why?
Really?
Wallah Azim.
And I had read it was a woman.
No, it's a Liwa. And you know why?
Wow.
Because when he went in a fellowship to Britain, a military Basa Askariya, he attended a classical musical performance. He attended
Yeah.
when he was in London once or twice. And so Sisi thought, okay, well that qualifies him to run Dar al-Opera Masri.
Wow.
So when he, actually his first story, he was saying this on Egyptian TV just recently in an interview. He said he went to Dar al-Opera and he found 600 musicians and he found no one in the audience. So he wanted to solve the problem. So he called up Amid Jamat Qahira, the dean of Cairo University, and said, I want students attending. So apparently he paid the students to now attend. So they, and he was bragging on Egyptian TV that he bought them ties. Because they were attending, they weren't wearing ties. And then he said, so it's improper to attend the opera without ties. So I bought them all ties and I had them put on the tie before they go sit. And they would tell me, and I said, if you don't get, you won't get your money if you fall asleep. Anyone that falls asleep doesn't get their money. And he is very proud. He is very proud. That's
When it first started, I saw an interview.
Well,
it was a
we
woman.
live in comedy.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just comedy. It's, what do you say?
Do we know what happened to the Indonesian group?
They still exist. The big thing that there was, apparently there was pressure by to have one of the ministers issue an order banning female recitation of Quran, and alhamdulillah that ban didn't go into effect. But they complain that they still get harassed, and so when that happened, I bought all their CDs because, of course, I wanted to preserve it. The archivist in me, I want to preserve it for history. So I have them here, actually, so I can, if I find them, they're just gorgeous.
What's their name?
I don't remember.
Don't you
But, I mean, Zenwood, he left, but he knew the group very well. So if he was
Next
here, he
time.
would have reminded us. Yeah, he actually knew the group. He knew the story. The minute I started talking about it, I said, "Oh yeah, and he's the one that actually told me that the ban didn't go into effect, but that they continue to harass and so on." What happened to Grace?
She's taking lunch again for.
Oh, she's the composer. So without the composer, I don't know.
Who else asked questions?
So
That were
you
not
had a very
answered?
good question.
Which one was that?
The one, the contemporary situation now.
Oh yeah.
I was just asking about you.
what was it?
It was. I was basically asking that you were talking about how we focus, like the Islam that we have today, with the focus on just like ritualistic, and like what the times that you're talking about the pietistic law, like, and I think you were saying like I thought like this Islam that we have today in some form, if it was given to the Sahaba as the Islam at their time, they wouldn't have accepted it. So I just want to expand on that thought and just ask, why.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. I mean, there are so many levels at which one can respond to this, but one of the things that has always struck me about the Seerah, and and I have a rather long halaqa about this, but is that truly the Prophet ﷺ, the way he interacted with the Sahaba, men and women, was remarkably empowering, not suffocating. I mean, so when you read in repeated narratives that, you know, stories about a woman that would stop him because she's arguing with her husband, and then you scrutinize the narratives about how he reacted to a a husband and wife arguing with each other, or the woman that you know, insists on divorcing her husband, and he asks her, you know, has he done anything wrong? And she says no, but I can't stand him. And then the famous story that after she divorced him, that the man used to cry and go around following her in Medina and begging her to take him back, but the way the Prophet ﷺ interacted with the Sahaba truly empowered individuals and ingrained in them sort of a sense of miqdamiyya, a sense of bravery and gutsiness. And you saw this especially in the way they interacted and the way they spread around the world after his death. I mean, the fact that they became like little modules, each one of them having an enormous impact upon the environment upon which they went. These were not men and women broken and suppressed by law. These were men and women empowered by a sense of freeness of spirit that is truly inspiring. And when I contrast that to the modern Muslim and the way that you see people coming out of our madrasas, I mean, when one of I actually, it's not that my mother told me this story because I actually remember it. You know, I was first enrolled in a school called the Gamil in Kuwait, Jamil. And I was beaten up by my teacher. So my poor mother then thought, okay, I'll enroll him in Fajr al-Sabah, which is a school by nuns. And I was beaten up at Fajr al-Sabah. I mean, it's like kids grow up from the school system, you know, suppressed and broken and twisted. It's not the empowered spirit that you see manifested by the Sahaba. So this has, that has fascinated me so much, because when also the research that I've done, for instance, on the wives of the Prophet and the impact each one of them has had, and how some of them chose to lead a very active life like Aisha, and some of them chose to lead a very private life like Maria. And but each of them clearly chose the path she wanted, and quite conscientiously so. So the one that didn't want a public life, people would go to her and ask her, what did the Prophet say? And she would say, leave me alone. I'm not interested in this. And others like Salama and Aisha, they developed students, and the confrontations between Aisha and her stories were Talha and Zubair and the rebellion. And I have become convinced through the book that I wrote, Rebellion in Islamic Law, that Aisha, especially Aisha, she wanted to share leadership with Talha and Zubair, and that the Battle of the Camel was not a rebellion in which, you know, Aisha was not, she was a full-fledged leader in that rebellion. Anyway, my point is that because I became so fascinated with that, I started tracing that in the language of the Quran itself, and in the way that the Quran deals with personal and individual accountability, and nurtures the relationship between each mu'min and mu'mina and each believer and their direct relationship with Allah. And then, you go from there, because then you become very fascinated in history, and you ask yourself, when were the best periods in our history and when were the worst periods? And then you start, perhaps I was a student of George Maqdisi, who wrote The Rise of Colleges in Islam at one point, and his work on the Islamic educational system and the various periods of George Maqdisi wrote a book that is well worth reading if any of you haven't read it. It's called The Rise of Colleges in Islam, and he has another book, Humanism in Islam, and he has a third book that I highly recommend called Ibn Tufayl. Not Ibn Tufayl, sorry. Someone remind me, who was it?
Ibn Aqil.
Ibn Aqil. Ibn Aqil, Sahib Kitab al-Fuhum. Through that work, then you become very fascinated in the Islamic periods of Islamic education and educational institutions, because one thing that is absolutely horrendous all over the Muslim world currently is the educational system. Absolutely behind all other nations. And there is a direct connection between a horrible educational system and the fact that we lag behind the rest of the world on everything else. So, that was the point that was... anyway.
It's 8 o'clock.
Oh, it's okay. So, any last takers? And I'll try to keep it very short, although, I know I struggle with that.
I can ask for the second
I had something that I was hesitating during the question about Salat al-Tasabih, because I don't remember exactly what you said in the original Halaqa. This is one of the Halaqas that
No, I don't think
you didn't talk about this prayer, but there was a similar point that came up about other prayers and kind of deeming this trend of deeming of, it's like if it's not sunnah, then it's haram. And you talked about how the Prophet had he just would sit in the mosque and read Quran and then go down to prayer or go down to sujood. So he would do different formations, and because I don't remember exactly what you were talking about or the context you were talking about, I was hesitant to bring it up, but it keeps sticking in my head that it seems like there's also kind of Wahhabis brought this trend of if it's not sunnah, then it's haram, which to me personally doesn't make much sense.
I think is that in fact the reason we have conflicting reports about a lot of the disagreements about the sunnah originate in the fact that different companions observed the Prophet ﷺ performing different things at different times. And the reason is that as if you collect the various narratives, there is the one thing everyone agrees on is that the man was constantly doing sujood and ruku' and you would observe different things at different times, and the reports that the disagreements, especially you take a book from Kitab al-Salah and any of the like Ibn Qudama's Mughni or Istarakhsi is mabsoot or something. And then you see all the different reports, and then if you sit back and and actually I've done that in the past where I started creating charts of the different reports, and then it dawned on me that they're clearly observing different practices at different times because of the extensiveness of the Prophet's ibadah. So he was from all reports, he practically was either constantly in a state of zikr or constantly praying, and we have numerous reports that he was constantly doing, and and he himself says that qurrat ayni fi salah, that the joy of my life was in prayer. And so I think that does apply to Salat al-Tasabih, because it there's a kernel of truth to every cultural practice that sprouted. I think that was Did you have a question?
أنا؟
Yeah.
لا.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm noticing. Of course, I'm not wearing my eyeglasses, so you're just a shadow. I'm not sure what I'm seeing, but it seemed like there was motion.
Oh, I don't think that was.
It might have been Munchkin.
It could have been without my eyeglasses. I can't tell the difference between Munchkin and any.
Thank
It
you.
could have very well been Munchkin. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.